Captain's Pick, the FPL Podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Captain's Pick, the FPL Podcast. I'm your host, Geoff at Willis, and each week I'll be talking fancy Premier League football with some esteemed guests, including my competitors and friends, competing against me in my mini-leagues. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about some highlights from Gameweek 1 weekend. Then I'll be talking about my squad and some decisions going into the Gameweek 2 weekend, which is the deadline on this coming Saturday, 18th of August at 11:30 in the morning. So a few highlights from the weekend. First place to start, I think, has to be Liverpool's 4-0 win over West Ham. Sadio Mane getting 2 goals there, along with Salah and Sturridge, assists from Robertson, Milner and Firmino. So Mane definitely starting well out the traps, and certainly one for me to be looking at as we go on through the season. Also, Robertson picking up clean sheet points and assists. The second notable game would be Man City's win away at Arsenal, 2-0. Goals from Sterling and Bernardo Silva. Crucially, 2 assists from Mendy and a clean sheet bonus for him. So he's definitely one to be looking at in your squads, certainly for the near future. The next highlight, and being a Chelsea supporter, this would be one of my highlights, but Chelsea winning a commanding 3-0 away win at Huddersfield. Goals from Pedro and, surprisingly, Kante and Jorginho, who are both midfielders in the game. Both are priced, I believe, at 5 for Kante, and I think Jorginho may have gone to 5.1. So definitely some cheap midfielders that may be worth looking at, especially if they're going to pick up goals, scoring points. Assists in that game coming from Alonso, of course, Hazard and Willian. Alonso, obviously, they're picking up clean sheet bonus and assist bonus, as well as bonus points. So even though he's expensive at 6.5 million, he's definitely one to be considering. And the last highlight from the weekend, I would say, is Everton's draw with Wolves, 2-2, and in particular Richarlison returning 2 goals from that game, as well as all 3 bonus points. He is definitely one to be considering for your team, especially if he continues with that strike rate. In this section, I'm going to be talking about my squad and some of the reasons behind picking the players I did, and some thoughts on who may be vulnerable and who may be transferred out in the next few weeks. Starting at goal, I went for Jordan Pickford of Everton at 5 million. They've got quite a good run of fixtures coming up in the next 10 weeks. A lot of home fixtures and fixtures against sort of mid to lower teams in the table. Obviously had a good World Cup with England in the summer. Going to be keeping an eye on him for those clean sheets though. At 5 million, there are a few goalkeepers priced at 4.5 that if they start to outscore Pickford, he could be vulnerable. In the second goalkeeper slot, I went for Artur Boruc of Bournemouth, full well knowing that he'd be behind Begovic, but he was 4 million. And so just wanted to save as much money as possible. With Pickford, if I were to bring him down to a 4.5 million goalkeeper, I'd maybe bump that extra 0.5 onto Boruc to give me 2 goalkeeping options that I could alternate between game weeks. In defence, my first pick was a Mendy from Man City. Man City do have a run of fixtures that looks very kind, a lot of home games, and again, a lot of games against teams that will be in the bottom half of the table, and he's already repaid the faith, certainly in that first game week, with a clean sheet and 2 assists and bonus points. So I'll definitely be looking to keep him in my team as long as he keeps up with the high point scoring. Next up, we have Tarkowski of Burnley. Much like a lot of my other defence, has a string of good game weeks coming up. Burnley always good for a clean sheet. Certainly from last season, they kept quite a few clean sheets. He's at 5 million, so a little pricey if the clean sheets don't come. So I'll be keeping an eye on him, but certainly in the next 8 game weeks, they look to have some fixtures where they could pick up some clean sheets. Very much similar to my other pick, Charlie Daniels of Bournemouth. They've definitely got, in the next 10 game weeks, some games that they could definitely pick up some clean sheets. He may pick up a couple of assists as well. He got me a clean sheet in the first game week, so he's certainly doing well for me at the moment. The next defender is Ryan Bertrand of Southampton. A bit like Tarkowski in terms of his price, so 5 million, but they have got some games coming up in the next 8 or 9 game weeks where he could pick up clean sheets and hopefully some assist bonuses. And because he is at 5 million, he'll be under the same kind of scrutiny as Tarkowski. But he did well in the first game week as he got me a clean sheet. My 5th and final defender is Wan-Bissaka at Crystal Palace. Wasn't sure if he was going to start the season as a starter, but he did, and did very well. Unfortunately, I had him on my bench, so I had 12 points sat on my bench, and my starting 11 all played. So unfortunately, those points remained on the bench. Hopefully he continues to start and he'll be a option for me. He is only 4 million, so definitely one to have in the squad. He'll probably alternate between the starting 11 and being my first pick on my bench, with Crystal Palace in the next sort of 8-9 game weeks. Definitely got some clean sheet potentials there, so I'll definitely be keeping an eye on him. In midfield, my first pick, and he was in the team from the very beginning, was Mo Salah of Liverpool at 13 million. Obviously very expensive, but I was wary of not having him and then him starting well and not being able to afford to bring him into the squad. Liverpool in the next 10 to 12 game weeks definitely have some winnable games, and I'll be looking at him to be scoring his fair share of goals and assists. And as I said earlier, he got off to a cracking start with a goal in the first game against West Ham. My second midfielder is Bernardo Silva of Man City. I did have Kevin De Bruyne in my team up until about a day before the first game week deadline, but I did read that De Bruyne may not start that game week as he'd only just come back from holiday after the World Cup, and so I thought I would pick Bernardo Silva. He's reasonably cheap at 7.5 million, and I definitely think he'll be starting the next 8 or 9 game weeks that look very winnable from Man City's point of view, especially as today we've found out that Kevin De Bruyne has picked up a knee injury in training and looks to be out for anything up to about 4 months. So I narrowly avoided a bit of disaster there, and so would have had to use up a transfer there. Also a good decision as Silva picked me up a goal in the first game week. The third midfielder in my squad is Richarlison of Everton. He's priced at 6.5 million, but has just rose up to 6.6 million. In the first 15 games, Everton have definitely got some potential to be scoring quite a lot of goals. He returned 2 goals in the first game week for me, so he'll definitely be staying in the side for a while. Slight doubt, the website saying that he's got a calf injury, 75% chance of playing, but most of the time that means the player does start. My last two midfielders I'll just group together, both 4.5 million. One is Lerma of Bournemouth and the other is Chalabar of Watford. Both cheap picks, but will be hopefully starting most games this season, and so good bench players to come off the bench to pick up a couple of points here and there if my starting 11 aren't picked. So going into my strike force, first one is Wilfried Zaha of Crystal Palace at 7 million. Already returned a goal in the first game, and along with Palace's next 8 or 9 fixtures, hopefully he'll be returning some goals and some assists there. He's under threat if he doesn't return those. At 7 million, there is a few other options that I'll be looking into. Next up is Harry Kane at 12.5 million, very expensive. Didn't score in the opening game week, but Spurs do have Fulham at home coming this game week. Tricky one with Harry Kane, as normally doesn't score in August. I'm hoping obviously he breaks that duck. Obviously came back late from the World Cup, but I'm hoping that he can bag a few goals against Fulham this weekend and justify the price tag. The last spot, I've got Firmino of Liverpool coming in at 9.5 million. We've got an assist in the first game. Normally picks up quite a few goals, but could potentially be a transfer target if the goals don't come. So there's my squad. It came in at 98.5 million, so I've got 1.5 million, which I wanted to have there just in case any potential disasters happened in the first game week. In the game week 1, I scored 83 points, and I am in the top 175,000 in the Premier League fantasy game. So pretty decent start. Some good points scored from a range of my players, which is always good to see. And very happy with that first game week start. Could have been a lot worse. So looking ahead to game week 2 in terms of transfers, because I do have that 1.5 million in my back pocket, the possibilities I'm looking at is to transfer out Firmino, as Liverpool are away at Palace, so that could be a little bit tricky for them, and looking potentially at bringing in Sergio Aguero of Man City, who's at 11 million, so I would be able to afford him with that 1.5 million that I've got left over. And I think that's really the only change I'm thinking of, unless there are any severe injuries that pop up in the next couple of days. But I definitely think that could be one. And then with the strategy of potentially in the next few game weeks alternating between Kane, Firmino and Aguero as my transfers in and out depending on who they're playing. Certainly this weekend with Spurs at home to Fulham and Man City at home to Huddersfield are the most likely options, as I think they could return the most points. In terms of the rest of the 11, I think I'll pretty much go with the same 11 as I started game week 1 as, obviously with the addition of maybe Aguero, with Wan-Bissaka on the bench as my first choice. Obviously they're at home to Liverpool, so maybe not a clean sheet bonus coming there. But if he's certain to play for Palace, at least I know I've got a starting player on my bench to come on to get me any points if any of my starting 11 don't start for their teams. In terms of my captain's pick for game week 2, very much the usual suspects. So Mo Salah, although he is away at Crystal Palace, so maybe a little bit tricky. Other captain options would be Bernardo Silva at home to Huddersfield, who could pick up some goal scoring points and some assists. Harry Kane at home to Fulham, little bit risky because he didn't return in the first game, but he's always an option. And certainly, if I do bring in Sergio Aguero, he would definitely be a captain candidate, as at home to Huddersfield is a very enticing fixture for him. Looking forward to game week 2, looking at possible big points coming. Everton at home to Southampton, so hopefully Richarlison will do well there, although I have Bertrand as well, who may keep a clean sheet, but I'll take the points from Richarlison. Spurs at home to Fulham, obviously Harry Kane, looking for big points from him there. The big game of the weekend is Chelsea versus Arsenal, which is the late game on Saturday at 5:30. Don't actually have players from either of those teams, but I will certainly be looking for a Chelsea win. Man City at home to Huddersfield, got to think that could be a big point scorer for Man City. So if I do have Aguero, I'll be looking at points from him, Bernardo Silva and Mendy. And to round off the game week fixtures, Palace at home to Liverpool, which is the Monday night game at 8 o'clock. Certainly be looking at trying to get some points from Salah there. But if no joy, then maybe a clean sheet bonus from Wan-Bissaka if he comes off the bench for me. And there you have it. That was the second episode of Captain's Pick, the FPL podcast. Do get in touch with me at Vilsey on Twitter for any questions you may have for me. The podcast will hopefully be available on iTunes in the next few days. It's being validated at the moment. And this is a reminder that the deadline for Game Week 2 is this coming Saturday, the 18th of August. And it will be 11:30 a.m. in the morning before the first game of the day, which is Cardiff at home to Newcastle at 12:30. Good luck with Game Week 2, and until next time, it's been my pleasure to talk with you. Captain's Pick, the FPL Podcast.